Hi, my sweet vintage kids friends. I am so excited to be joining you. It's Miss Tiffany from Vintage Downtown. I don't know about you, but we are getting ready for school to start in our house. I hope that you are getting excited for a brand new year. I know we are. I've missed seeing you in our classroom so much. But today I get to spend time with you here, and I am very thankful for that. I know this past year we've spent the year learning about God and His kingdom and all about who God is and how much He loves us. And because of how much He loves us, we've learned how to respond to that love and how to interact with others in His kingdom. But I wonder how it actually looks lived out. Has anyone actually loved and glorified God in a kingdom that wasn't their own? We're going to take a look at our catechism question for this series. And the question is, how can we glorify God? And our answer is by loving Him and obeying His commands. And we're going to learn about a young man not much different than you and his friends. This week, we're going to learn some background about Daniel and his friends. And I bet this is a story you might have heard before, but we'll dig in a little bit. So our background comes from the Bible, the book in the Bible, Daniel, in chapter 1. And you can read the full story of Daniel chapter 1 this week alone or with your families. But our story says this. Daniel was a young man living in Jerusalem. While living in Jerusalem, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon declared war on Jerusalem and took over the city. And once the king took over the city, he looked at the head of the palace staff and said, "Get some Israelites from the royal family and nobility, young men who are healthy and handsome, very smart, and men who will be good leaders. Teach them the ways of Babylon, the language and the ways of magic. Feed them Babylonian food from the royal table. After 3 years of training, they will be given positions in the king's court." So 4 men from Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, were among those selected. The head of the palace staff gave them Babylonian names. Daniel was named Belteshazzar. It's hard to say, isn't it? Hananiah was named Shadrach. Mishael was named Meshach, and Azariah was named Abednego. But Daniel decided that he would not defile himself by eating the king's food or drinking his drink. Jewish people in that time, and now even, had special laws to follow about what kind of food they could eat and how foods could be prepared. And the Babylonians did not follow these rules. So Daniel wanted to honor God in the rules, so he asked the head of the palace staff to let him keep from that diet. And the head of the palace staff, by God's grace, liked Daniel. But he warned him, "I'm afraid of what my master the king will do. He is the one who assigned the diet. And if he sees that you are not as healthy as the others, he will be angry." But Daniel said to the palace staff, "Try us out for 10 days on a simple diet of vegetables and water. Then compare us to the young men who eat from the royal menu. Make your decisions on the basis of what you see." The palace staff agreed to do it and fed them vegetables and water for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, they looked better and more healthy than all the others who had been eating from the royal menu. So the steward continued to leave them off of the royal menu of food and drink and serve them only vegetables and water. God gave these 4 men knowledge and skill in both books and life. In addition, Daniel was gifted in understanding all sorts of visions and dreams. At the end of the time set by the king for the training, the head of the royal staff brought them in to Nebuchadnezzar. When the king interviewed them, he found them far better than all the other young men. None were a match for Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they took their place in the king's service. Whenever the king asked them about anything on books or on life, he found them 10 times better than all the other magicians and enchanters in his kingdom put together. And Daniel continued in the king's service. So Daniel was a normal young man living his life when his way of life was shaken. He went from seeing life one way, living under the rule of the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. But, like we talked about last week, Daniel and his friends were exiles. They were living in a kingdom that was not their own, but they knew what they should do for the glory of God. So they would do it in a way that would help the kingdom see happiness and growth, but also follow the commands of God. So let's think. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to think about them. What are some ways Daniel and his friends began to fit in with their life in Babylon? And what are some things they did to help them relate to Babylonian life? And they learned the language, they studied books, they became men in the king's castle, and they trained under the king's staff. Another question would be, what are some ways Daniel and his friends upheld the expectations that God set aside for them? And they refused to eat the food that was prepared in a way that didn't honor God. And they refused to eat food that didn't honor God. It was important to them, and it was important to God. And what can we learn about trusting God in exile from Daniel and his friends? And these are going to be a little bit different. But let's think about it. We could trust God through changing, trusting God even when you're different from everyone else. That's hard, but I know you can do it. And we can follow God's commands even when they're hard. Everything that relates to reliance on God and trusting his provisions. So I'm going to encourage you to take some time this week to read through Daniel 1 again, either on your own or with a grown-up in your house. You can journal about it. You can draw pictures about it. And talk to the grown-ups in your house maybe about how this made you feel, and how you feel, how you could honor God in maybe this time of social distancing even. I love you guys so much. I hope you have a great week.